What a wonderful agenda just articulated by Anwar Ibrahim. I am privileged to have just come from Kuala Lumpur in Malaysia, where I was personally able to experience the absolute euphoria of the people there as they watched him walk out from jail a free man. And I know that his sacrifice and his courage and his determination was what helped galvanize that extraordinary election turnout and that change of opinion, that tsunami that swept that entrenched government from power through the ballot box, through a democratic election. I just hope that that gives inspiration to some of you here who are challenging entrenched regimes, because nobody thought it could happen in that way, peacefully and by the ballot box. But it did. And perhaps by talking to you now, I'll be able to explain some of the ways in which that happened. No one thought, none of the experts, none of the analysts, and indeed so many of the activists that I spoke to, that this could actually happen, because the power of the Barisan National Government was so entrenched. Najib Razak and his powerful wife there had centralized the government after so many decades in power into an absolute knot of autocratic control. Anwar dominated both the finance ministry and the prime ministry, together with a coterie of crony businessmen. They controlled the economy. The media was reduced to a propaganda tool for the government. Parliament was a puppet. You know these kind of regimes. So easy for them to manipulate the election when it came. Everybody thought, because of course the independence of the judiciary, the independence of the civil service had been undermined over years. And of course, what had been a successful opposition movement under Anwar had been absolutely negated by his imprisonment, orchestrated by Najib himself. His wife and his daughter were left tragically trying to hold an opposition together that was, of course, riven by factionalism. It looked hopeless. Najib, under pressure, strengthened his powers in the months coming up to the election. He brought in one of the first fake news laws in the world, which was deliberately directed at frightening and intimidating even social media users from saying things against the government. He brought in an anti-terror law, which he happily used to lock up people who criticized him without any trial. He brought in emergency powers, so if the worst came to the worst, we all feared, as we could feel that tsunami of opinion developing against him, we feared that he would just cancel the election and institute the end of democracy in Malaysia. So facing that situation, an intimidated electorate, fearful of the upcoming election and what might happen after, what was the role of a journalist? And I guess I should now introduce myself. I am a journalist, and for nearly a decade I've been covering corruption issues in Malaysia. Why did I think that was worthwhile? Why was I doing it? And this is because I believe that information is power, and that journalists bring information to the people. And I had found a way of getting past this extraordinary control of the media that had developed in Malaysia. The internet, I was able to communicate out through the internet in my own language, English, to Malaysians who could then, again, through social media, bring all that through in their own language, translated via WhatsApp, right down to the guy in the village, what I was finding out and had to tell them. The fact that my website was banned, in the end, didn't seem to matter so much. How come a British journalist was involved in these Malaysian issues? Well, I had my links. I was born in Sarawak, and I had started this whole investigation into corruption by going back to the place of my birth and seeing the impact of poor governance, of corruption, at ground level on the people who were affected. Indigenous people thrown out from their lands, an environmental disaster as the Borneo rainforest, the third largest in the world, was being ripped out for timber extraction and palm oil exploitation. And what I could see was that this was purely for the benefit of a handful of people and not at all for the benefit of the majority. And doesn't that add up? Isn't that the problem we have? Particularly interesting to me was the role of global finance and global institutions in this form of corruption. People from the West, bankers, institutions, were helping siphon out that wealth from the scene of the crime through the offshore system and into our own economies, bringing their corruption with them. All these issues, I felt, were of enormous interest, not just to people in Malaysia, but to all of us here across the world. Now, 1MDB was the corruption story. I did so many, but this was the one where I was able to get global attention and really bring together Malaysians on a story that went straight to the door of the Prime Minister himself. 1MDB was a development fund set up by Najib and his powerful wife, together with a very enterprising, characterful young Chinese-Malaysian financier named Joe Low. Joe Low was very good at working out, blagging banks into transferring the odd billion across the globe, you know. And the banks were eagerly gullible, I would say, in many of these cases. This development fund was clearly losing money by the time I looked into it in 2015. Now a total of 8 billion and more is officially missing from that fund. And it was clear that that Najib was making investments through 1MDB that were then disappearing. I became entranced when I discovered that the film Wolf of Wall Street was being financed by the son of the Prime Minister, the supposed producer of this movie. And when I discovered that his ubiquitous at his side was none other than this young financier, Joe Low. And I started to put two and two together to look into whether maybe some of that missing money was going into Najib's family's filmmaking enterprises. And you will know that Wolf of Wall Street is all about a bunch of young thieves who scandalously spend millions in the most disgraceful excesses. So I started looking into these young producers and began to realize that what went on in the movies was nothing compared to the lifestyle of these young men and the money that they were splashing around the world. So I took on the story, and it was fun to write, it was fun to research, and I think, with a sort of horrid fascination, Malaysia and later the world followed the antics whereby you could see these boys buying yachts worth £250 million, properties in New York, mansions in Beverly Hills. They were part of the super society of Hollywood. They were jetting the likes of Leo DiCaprio, Miranda Kerr, Paris Hilton, off to places like Las Vegas, where they were hosting great casino parties and incredible, jaw-dropping events, drenched with Cristal champagne, bikini-serving girls by the score, dancing dwarves, caged lions, you name it. It was outrageous. And of course, remember, this was all Malaysia's development money, borrowed at high interest rates. I kept this story going, as hard as I could. But as you can imagine, as the whistleblowers started coming forward, and I was starting to actually nail that, yes, I could prove this money was coming from 1MDB, things started to get very tricky indeed. And when I came with the final sort of bombshell story, which was that $700 million could be traced from 1MDB into the Prime Minister's own personal bank account, it came in just before the 2013 election, which he won, which, in fact, Anwar won the popular vote, but thanks to gerrymandering, Barisan Nasional kept power. This was the big story that really caused me trouble and woke Malaysia up to what was going on. Najib could not deny he'd received the money. He said it was a gift from a mystery, anonymous Arab prince. My audience, my readership, were left to decide who they believed. And of course, a great deal of money and effort went into vilifying me, intimidating me. Back home in England, a warrant for my arrest was issued for issuing false news in Malaysia. My blog was banned. And indeed, Najib even tried to issue a red notice alert to have me extradited back to Malaysia as a terrorist, luckily rejected by Interpol. But what my journalism had managed to achieve was the attention of the international regulators. Najib used all his powers to close down this investigation in Malaysia, of course, but the DOJ and FBI came in on the trail, as did many other regulators, and they started to stand up my story. They brought in the facts. They showed how the money had indeed gone from 1MDB into the excesses of Joe Low and his friends, into Najib's bank account. And we had this war of attrition, really, for the last 2 years running up to the election. Me trying to keep the story going, withstand the pressure, the legal cases and all the rest, and backed up by the very believable evidence of the international regulators. And I think that played its part in bringing together that public opinion in Malaysia that understood the threat of this regime, that felt it could do what it liked, plundered what it liked, and it brought a unity. The 92-year-old former strongman of Malaysia led that coalition against Najib, supported by reformists, some of whom he put in jail in the past. He adopted their reform agenda. They laid aside their differences, and at the top of their agenda was a commitment to get Anwar Ibrahim out of jail. So I hope that by bringing information to the people, I played my part in that, and I think I would like to leave that message that the role of an independent media is so important to achieving democratic change. Thank you. Thank you.